The silver tray struck the flagstones, and in the space of a single breath the entire garden fell silent to watch a servant's daughter kneel among shattered crystal while 100 noble guests decided whether to laugh. It was the late summer of 1817, and the cliffs above Evershade Cove had never looked so fine. The great lawns of Moonmere Hall stretched toward the sea in waves of clipped green, and the air carried the bruised sweetness of sea lavender. Lanterns waited to be lit. Musicians tuned their strings beneath a canopy of white roses. All of it had been arranged to celebrate the coming marriage of Duke Caspian Valahart, a man the kingdom admired for his quiet honor, to the dazzling Lady Seraphine Vosmere. And it was Seraphine who now stood over the kneeling girl, her gloved hand still raised from the gesture that had sent the tray flying. "Look at her," Seraphine said, her voice carrying to the farthest table. "Tell me, what does one expect when a kitchen mouse is allowed among her betters?" The girl on the ground did not weep. Her name was Leora Ashwin, and she was 19 years old, the daughter of a housemaid who had served Moonmere Hall for 20 years. She had only come into the garden to carry water to the older guests in the heat. Now her palms were cut, and the laughter began to ripple outward, hesitant at first, then bolder, the way cruelty always grows when no one stops it. "I am sorry, my lady," Leora said softly. She gathered the broken pieces with steady fingers, though a thin line of red traced her wrist. "It was clumsy of me." "It was born in you," Seraphine answered. "Apologies do not wash away blood like yours." Leora lifted her chin then, not in defiance but in something quieter and harder to break. She would not give them tears. That much she could keep. What Seraphine did not know, what none of them knew, was that the Duke had been standing beneath the rose canopy from the very first moment. He had watched the tray fall. He had heard every word. And now he was walking toward them across the lawn. The crowd noticed him before Seraphine did. The laughter died by degrees, table by table, until the only sound was the distant hush of the sea against the cliffs. Caspian Valahart was not a loud man. He did not need to be. He crossed the grass with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already decided, and the guests parted before him as though pulled by a tide. Seraphine arranged her face into a smile. "Caspian, you must forgive the interruption. A small accident, nothing more." The Duke did not look at her. He knelt instead, there on the flagstones in front of every noble in the county, and he took the cut hand of the maid's daughter into his own. "You are bleeding," he said. "It is nothing, Your Grace." Leora tried to draw her hand back. He did not let her. "It is not nothing." He raised his eyes to the gathered crowd, and his voice, when it came, was calm and terrible. "This young woman carried water to my guests in the heat of the afternoon, and she was struck for her trouble. I have known this hall since I was a boy. I have never been ashamed of anyone in it." He paused. "Until today." No one spoke. Seraphine's smile had frozen into something brittle. Caspian helped Leora to her feet. He drew a handkerchief of fine linen from his coat and bound it around her wrist with a care that silenced the garden more completely than any shout. Then he offered her his arm, as a gentleman offers it to a lady, and he led her away from the broken glass and the staring eyes toward the cool shade of the eastern terrace. Behind them, Seraphine stood alone in the center of the lawn, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it was to be looked at by everyone and chosen by no one. The scandal traveled faster than any carriage. By the following morning, every drawing-room from the Cove to the capital knew that the Duke of Valahart had humbled his own bride before her guests and shown tenderness to a maid's child instead. Some called it madness, some called it a fever of conscience. A very few, the ones who had known Caspian longest, wondered whether they had ever truly known him at all. Leora knew none of this. She sat in the small servant's kitchen at dawn, while her mother cleaned the cuts with vinegar and trembling hands. "You must keep your head down now," her mother whispered. "Do you hear me, Leora? Whatever he did, it changes nothing for us. It only makes us more visible. And the visible are the first to fall. I did not ask him to do it, Mother. I know. That is what frightens me." Her mother, whose name was Edith, pressed the bandage tight and would not meet her daughter's eyes. There was a grief in her that Leora had never been able to name, a shadow that had lived in the house as long as she had. She did not ask after it. One did not ask the dead to explain their graves. That afternoon, a footman came to the kitchen with a message that made the cook drop her ladle. The Duke wished to see Miss Ashwin in the library. Leora went because one did not refuse a duke, and she stood just inside the great doors with her hands folded, certain she was about to be dismissed from the only home she had ever known. Caspian rose from behind his desk. In the morning light he looked younger than his 30 years and far more tired. "How is your hand?" "It heals, Your Grace. You should not have troubled yourself." "I have heard that sentence from a great many people since yesterday." A faint, weary humor touched his mouth. "I begin to think no one in this county believes I am permitted to behave decently." "Forgive me," Leora said. "I only meant that you have made things difficult for yourself, for me as well." It was not the answer a maid was supposed to give a duke, and they both knew it. Caspian studied her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, as though he were seeing the whole of a person rather than the station she occupied. "You are right," he said. "I have, and I would do it again." He came around the desk. "May I ask you something, Miss Ashwin? When she struck the tray from your hands, you did not cry. Why?" Leora considered the question with the seriousness it had not earned in his mind, but had earned in hers. "Because tears would have been a gift," she said at last, "and I did not wish to give her one." Caspian Valhart, a man who had spent his life being told what he ought to feel, felt something he had not expected. He felt understood. That was the beginning, though neither of them would have called it so. The reckoning came quicker than gossip. Within the fortnight, Lord Vosmere himself rode to Moonmere Hall, and the door of the study stayed closed for 3 long hours. Leora learned the shape of it, the way servants learn everything, in fragments carried up the back stairs. The Valihart estate was not as rich as its lawns pretended. The cliffs and the white roses concealed debts that the marriage was meant to settle. If Caspian broke the engagement, the Vosmeres would call in what was owed, and Moonmere Hall, which had stood above the cove for 200 years, might pass out of his family forever. She understood then the true weight of what he had done for her. He had not merely embarrassed his bride, he had set fire to his own future. She resolved to stay out of his sight. It was the only kindness she could offer him in return. But the cove was small, and the gardens were vast, and there is a kind of meeting that no resolution can prevent. She found him one evening on the lower path that wound down toward the shore, where the sea lavender grew wild between the rocks, and the light lay gold across the water. "Miss Ashwin." He did not seem surprised. "You walk here too." "I did not know it was yours." "All of it is mine, and none of it is, which is the great joke of my life." He gestured to the rock beside him, an invitation that crossed 100 unspoken laws. "Sit. The tide is coming in. It is the best hour." She should have gone. She sat. They had barely begun to speak, of small things, the herring boats, the quarrelling gulls, when a boy came scrambling down the path behind them, breathless, a stable lad of perhaps 12. "Your Grace," he gasped. A carriage on the cliff road, the Vosmere crest, Lord Vosmere himself, and not a quarter-mile off. Caspian was on his feet at once. He looked at Leora, and for the first time she saw fear in him, not for himself, but for her. "Go up the eastern stair," he said quickly, "not the path. If he sees you here with me, he will not need a reason to call the debt. He will have one." He pressed something into her hand without looking at it, the warmth of his fingers there and gone. "Go." She went. She did not run, because running is what the guilty do, but she walked fast, her heart loud in her ears, and she did not breathe easily until the kitchen door closed behind her. Only then did she open her hand. It was the linen handkerchief he had bound her wrist with, washed and folded, returned without a word. She understood, standing there, that whatever had begun between them now had a price hanging over it, and that the price would be paid by whoever was caught first. Seraphine did not need to catch them. She needed only to make them careful, and frightened people make mistakes. Her first move was small and precise. Within days, Edith Ashwin was taken from the upstairs rooms she had kept for 20 years and sent down to the sculleries, to the cold work, the lie and the scrubbing that ruined an older woman's hands within a season. No reason was given. None was needed. The order came in Seraphine's hand, and everyone in the house understood the message folded inside it. Leora found her mother bent over a wash trough at dusk, her knuckles already cracked and weeping. "Say nothing," Edith warned before her daughter could speak. "Do you hear me? Say nothing, do nothing, ask for nothing. She is showing you what she can do to me. If you go to him, she does worse. This is the price of being noticed, child. I told you. I told you." Leora knelt beside the trough and took the lie-burned hands in her own, and she said nothing, because her mother was right, and they both knew it. But something in her had hardened into a shape she did not yet have a name for. She did not go to Caspian. He came to her. He found her in the upper corridor the next morning, an armful of linen between them like a wall. "I have heard what was done to your mother," he said. His voice was very low. "I did not order it. I would never." "I know that, Your Grace. It changes nothing. You cannot countermand your bride in her own household war without making it worse. If you move my mother back up the stairs, Lady Seraphine will simply find a crueler place to put her. So please." Her voice did not break, but it cost her not to. "Do nothing. You ask me to stand by. I ask you to be wiser than your anger." He was quiet a moment. "You are angry with me," he said. "I am a servant, Your Grace. I have no right to be angry with you." "That is not an answer. That is a fence. Then perhaps you should respect the fence." He stepped aside to let her pass, but his voice followed her down the corridor. "I have spent 30 years respecting fences, Miss Ashwin. It has made me lonely, and it has made me a coward, and I am weary of both." She did not stop walking, but she carried the words with her for a long time after. What Caspian did next, he did quietly, and Leora did not learn of it until later. He did not move Edith up the stairs. Instead, he rode to the village and arranged, through the parish, a small pension in Edith Ashwin's name, a sum she could not be deprived of by any order from the hall, payable whether she served or not. It was the act of a man who could not win the war Seraphine was fighting, so chose to change the ground beneath it. When Seraphine learned of it, she understood that her small, precise cruelty had been answered, not with anger, but with a kind of cold and patient resolve she had not known the Duke possessed. It frightened her more than any shout, and frightened people set traps. The ball was its spring. She had not surrendered. She was not a woman built for surrender. If she could not have the Duke's affection, she would have his name, his land, and his obedience. The Vosmere ball would draw half the kingdom. The engagement would be reaffirmed before them all, the scandal smoothed over, and the maid's daughter forgotten like a stain scrubbed from a sleeve. But Seraphine wished to be certain. And so, the evening before the ball, she summoned Leora to her chambers. "You imagine he loves you," Seraphine said, not unkindly, which made it worse. She sat at her glass, removing her earrings one by one. "Perhaps he even believes it himself. Men of his sort confuse pity with passion. They are forever rescuing things. A wounded bird, a beggar, a maid with cut hands. It flatters them." She turned. "But a bird is kept in a cage, child, or it is released. It is never seated at the table." "I have asked for nothing," Leora said. "No, you are too clever for that. That is why I'm asking you instead." Seraphine rose and crossed the room. "Leave, tonight. There is a coach to the north at dawn, and a purse in it large enough to begin a life somewhere no one knows your face. If you stay, the Vosmeres will take this house, and they will turn your mother out into the road at her age to die in a ditch. That is within my power. I want you to understand that it is entirely within my power." "Why do you hate me?" Leora asked. "I am nothing to you." For a moment, something flickered behind Seraphine's perfect composure. Something that looked almost like fear. "Because he looked at you," she said quietly, "the way no one has ever looked at me, and I have spent my whole life being looked at." She returned to her glass. "Take the coach. It is the only mercy I will ever offer you." Leora left the chamber with her decision already made. She would take the coach, not for the purse which she would not touch, but for her mother. She would not let Edith perish for the sake of a feeling that could never be permitted to exist. She went to pack her single trunk, and it was there, beneath the worn lining she had touched 1,000 times without thought, that she found the letters. They were yellowed and tied with a faded ribbon, hidden where only a daughter clearing out her mother's keepsakes might one day discover them. Leora should not have read them. She read them anyway, by the light of a single candle, and her hands began to shake. They were love letters. They were 30 years old, and they were written in the hand of the old Duke, Caspian's father, to a young woman named Edith Ashwin. The shadow had a name at last. Leora sat with the letters until the candle guttered. Her mother had not always been a maid. She had been loved once by the master of this house, before duty and a richer marriage had torn them apart and left her with nothing but service and silence and a child. Leora did the arithmetic that fear makes slow, the dates, the years, the careful gaps in her mother's story. She did not know even then whether she was the old Duke's daughter or merely the child of a woman he had loved and abandoned. The letters did not say, but she understood one thing with terrible clarity. Whatever she was to Caspian, friend or stranger, or something the world had no word for, the threads that bound their two families ran deeper and darker than either of them had ever guessed. And if it were known, it would not save her. It would damn them both. She put the letters in her pocket. She did not take the coach. Instead, she walked through the sleeping house to the library, where she knew the Duke kept late hours, and she knocked once and entered, and she laid the ribboned bundle on his desk without a word. Caspian read. She watched the candlelight move across his face as the past rearranged itself behind his eyes. When he finished, he set the last page down very gently, as though it might break. "You knew nothing of this," he said. It was not a question. "Nothing. My mother never spoke of it. I think she could not bear to." He stood and went to the window, his back to her, and for a long while the only sound was the sea. "My father was a cold man," he said at last. "I never understood why. Perhaps now I do. He gave up the thing he wanted to keep the thing he was supposed to want, and it hollowed him out, and he spent the rest of his life teaching me to do the same." He turned. "He nearly succeeded. Your Grace, if this is known, it will destroy you. A duke entangled with the daughter of his father's mistress. They will not even let you keep the scandal of breaking your engagement. They will bury you under this one instead. Then we will not let it be known." He crossed the room and stopped before her, close enough that she had to lift her face to his. "Leora, I have spent these weeks telling myself I admired your courage, your grace, your kindness. All of it was true, and all of it was a coward's way of not saying the rest." His voice dropped. "I love you. Not as a wounded bird to be rescued, not as a maid to be pitied. As a woman, I would choose over every acre of this estate and every name in that ball tomorrow, if you would have me." Leora's wall, the one she had built so carefully, did not fall. It simply ceased to matter. "You cannot choose me," she whispered. "It will cost you everything." "I have been counting the cost of everything my whole life," he said. "I should like just once to count the worth of something instead." She did not answer him with words. She rose onto her toes and kissed him, there in the library where his father had once signed away his own heart, and for a long moment the debt and the scandal and the cruel arithmetic of the world fell silent. But the morning came, as mornings do, and with it the ball and the trap that Seraphine had set still waited to be sprung. They went together. That was Caspian's decision, and Leora could not talk him out of it, though she tried until the carriage reached the lights of Vosmere House. He had dressed her in nothing borrowed and given her nothing false. She entered on his arm in her own plain grey gown, a maid among countesses, and the whole glittering room turned to stone. Seraphine descended the great staircase like a blade. "Caspian," she said, smiling for the crowd. "How charming! You have brought your charity with you." "I have brought the woman I intend to marry," Caspian said. The words landed like a thrown stone. The musicians faltered. Lord Vosmere stepped forward, his face dark with fury. "You will reconsider, Valhart, or you will be ruined by sundown. The debt is mine to call, and I will call it. You will lose the hall. You will lose your name. For this?" He gestured at Leora with contempt. "For a maid?" "For her," Caspian said simply. "Yes." Seraphine's voice cut across the hall, sweet and merciless. "Before you throw away your 200 years, Your Grace, perhaps these good people should know what your maid truly is. Shall I tell them? Shall I tell them whose bed her mother once warmed in that very house?" The crowd leaned in, hungry. Leora felt the floor tilt beneath her. This was the trap. Not the debt. This. The ruin dressed as truth, ready to swallow them both. But it was Leora who stepped forward, and not Caspian. "You may tell them," she said, and her voice did not shake. "What you think you know. That my mother loved a man above her station, and was cast aside for a richer match, and raised her child alone in service without complaint. You may tell them that." She looked slowly around the silent room, at the powdered faces, the watching eyes. And then perhaps these good people might ask themselves which of the two was truly without honor. The woman who loved and was abandoned, or the man who abandoned her to keep his name clean for evenings such as this one. No one laughed this time. Seraphine's smile cracked. She had expected tears, or flight, or a maid's silence. She had not expected the maid to be unafraid. It was Lord Vosmere's own wife who broke the silence. An old woman, sharp-eyed, who had watched her husband trade their daughter for a title and had her own opinions about clean names. "Edmund," she said to her husband in a voice like dry leaves, "lower your hand. You will not call any debt tonight. I have buried enough of this family's cruelty to know the taste of it, and I will not have us serve it again as supper." She looked at Leora, and something in her hard old face softened by a degree. "The girl has more spine than the lot of you." Lord Vosmere, who feared his wife more than scandal, lowered his hand. The ball did not recover. The guests drifted out in clusters, whispering, and the great rooms emptied of everyone but the players in the small, fierce drama that had unfolded among the candles. Seraphine stood alone at the foot of the staircase, beautiful and undone, the architect of a trap that had closed on no one but herself. Caspian crossed to her. "I am sorry," he said, and to her astonishment he meant it. "Not for choosing her, for letting you believe, for even an hour, that I might be the husband you deserved. You deserved a man who would look at you the way you wished to be looked at. I was never going to be him. I should have told you so months ago and spared us both." For a moment, Seraphine said nothing. Then, very quietly, in a voice no one but he could hear, she said, "Be happy, Caspian, so that at least one of us is." And she turned and climbed the stairs alone, and that was the last he ever spoke to her. The debt was not called. The scandal burned hot for a season, and then, as scandals do, gave way to newer ones. There were those who never forgave the Duke of Valehart for marrying a maid. There were more in the quiet villages along the cove who told the story by their winter fires for years, and always with a kind of fierce delight, the way ordinary people tell the tale of the day the high were humbled and the overlooked were chosen. Edith Ashwin wept when her daughter told her all of it. Not from sorrow. She had carried her silence for 30 years, and to set it down at last, to see the man's son make right what the father had broken, undid something in her that had long been held too tight. She lived to see the wedding. She stood in the small chapel above the cove in a new grey dress, and she did not serve a single soul that day, and she cried through the whole of it, and no one minded in the least. Years afterward, when the sea lavender was blooming again and the cliffs above Evershade Cove lay gold in the long evening light, a woman walked the lower path toward the shore with 2 children running ahead of her through the rocks. Her grey gown had given way to one of soft blue, and there were small lines of weather and laughter at her eyes now. But her step was the same, unhurried and certain, like someone who had once decided something and never once regretted it. A man waited for her on the rocks where the tide came in. His sleeves were rolled. He was watching the water as though it still owed him an answer, though he wore the ease now of a man who had long since received it. "You are late," Caspian said, not turning. "Your son insisted on counting the gulls," Leora answered, settling beside him as the tide reached their feet. "He has reached 40. He intends to reach 1,000. He laughed and took her hand, the same hand he had bound with linen on a flagstone years before, and the old scar had faded almost to nothing. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, the way she sometimes did, not from fear anymore, but from the simple pleasure of hearing the answer. "Every acre of it," he said gravely. "The name, the fortune, the good opinion of people I despised." He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the faded scar. "I count the worth of it every single day, and the books have never once failed to balance." The children called from the rocks. The sun went down gold across the water, and the great house stood behind them on the cliff, full at last of the only thing that had ever been missing from it. If this story warmed your heart, stay a while. There are more like it waiting to be told.